Fantastic. Well, so our next presenter is Dorsa Kafili, who is a PhD candidate at Melbourne School of Design. And Dorsa's going to be talking, well, talk is titled The Architectural Blueprint in Virtual Worlds, Atmospheric Qualities as Building Blocks of Alternative Experiences.
Oh, sure. My background has been always in architecture, and when I chose this topic on video games, I was also interested in how video games use architecture. So many video games use architectural spaces and design principles to build their worlds, to create spatial experiences and believable, authentic environments. Media and game scholars have pointed out that architecture speaks through game environments. And Jenkins is a famous media scholar that has famously said that game designers don't simply tell stories, they design worlds and sculpt spaces. Also, Michael Lish, another media scholar, has seen video games as hybrid between architectural navigation and cinematically represented spaces. There is an organic relationship between architecture and video games. Video game designers use architecture in their worlds, and also architects are shifting from architecture into the discipline of video game industry to be environmental artists, world building designers, and also even architectural consultants for video games. In my research, I look at those spatial characteristics that contribute to provide an experience, feel, mood, vibe, that can help to some degrees of immersion in video games. So immersion is a very controversial notion in video games, but there are some technical and specific definitions that we can use to objectively create immersion, like connect senses, human senses, to video game environments. So immersion is the objective level of sensory fidelity delivered by a system such as a virtual reality platform or interactive simulation in video game media, and it is distinct from presence, which is a subjective psychological response of a user experiencing that same system. And especially these spatial qualities are important in creating believable spaces that are at the same time fantastical. Rob Bridges says, when designing fantastical, imaginative, futuristic, or sci-fi settings, the spatial experience must feel possible and relatable. The establishing of a concrete and believable reality will be extremely important later when we start to contrast that with elements that cannot possibly be real. So, in a very basic level, video games are audiovisuals media, creating visual representations of a space with interactive audio. Along with a good narrative, architectural and spatial qualities help to create believability in video game images and add sort of that magical realism touch to them. Many architects try to create spaces that engage our senses, to create spaces that can be memorable for people. And they refer to this as atmosphere, to theorize it and talk about it. Zumthor is a famous architect and famously has said that I enter a building, see a room, and in a fraction of a second have this feeling about it. This is something that architects look for when they talk about atmospheres, a space that moves us. In video games, we have the same trend, to craft the feeling of a space by designing atmospheric images that can appeal to the senses. There are a lot of games that we can talk about and can be categorized as atmospheric, But in my research, I studied these two games and that create alternative fantastical environments in very distinct ways. One is three-dimensional, one is pixel art, two-dimensional. But in each of them, there is one spatial quality that stands out to make that otherworldly sense to them. Control has publicly identified itself as a new weird game. It bridges across genres of science fiction, fantasy, and cosmic horror, and this thematic approach had to be woven into the game's world building. For creating this world, Stuart McDonald, the world building director of the game, defines new weird as a quite challenging term to reach as a consensus, and he wanted to use his background in architecture to show these ideas through architectural components. So the narrative of the game is about this unsettling concept of gradual transformative force that reshapes a portion of the world into an unfamiliar pattern. It is about disparities of conventional versus unconventional, order versus chaos, mundane versus strangeness. And the design term that for designing it, they call it architectural jump scares. So the designers started to show this contrast through architectural form, scale, materiality, and light. The setting of the game also helps the environmental storytelling. They use the most mundane and somehow boring spaces of bureaucratic headquarters, offices, to then create a very contrasting atmosphere to that. Lighting design, especially in this game, integrates with forms and spaces to both emphasize the mundane and new weird. So to break down how architectural form and lighting are working together, I use theories in lighting design in architecture and used Colin and Benya's categorization of layers, light has layers, task and focal layer, ambient layer, decorative layer, and another light designer, Richard Kelly, who talks about more poetically, talks about focal glow, ambient luminescence, and play of brilliance. These scholars all talk about light, not as just functional to help us see and light up a space, but talk about also how to make atmosphere in spaces, which can be translated back into video games. And comparing them together, we can see that they are talking about like the focal and task focal layer are direct lighting schemes, ambient layers are indirect illumination, and decorative layers are ornamental effects of lighting that are added to spaces. So direct lighting basically separates important from unimportant. It is a spotlight that creates extreme contrast between the subject targeted and the surroundings that fall into shadow. In architectural design, directional lighting schemes are about controlling darkness as much as managing light. They employ the binary visuals of light and dark, but also extend it beyond simple contrast, being used as a material in a spatial design. So directional light integrates with form in very different ways in architectural spaces to create details and pattern or accentuate a form, create rhythmic spaces, or make a space important and making spatial hierarchies. In video games, it also separates the important from an unimportant. Its primary role is to guide the player's navigation by highlighting a spot or showing points of interest. Besides controlling sight, extreme lighting conditions can be a primary game mechanism to instill a strong emotional response, typically one of unease and fear. Casting harsh, direct light onto walls, floors, or other surfaces creates a sense of confinement and eeriness. These binary visuals simultaneously stimulate players' imagination to fill in the gaps of missing information in their blackout areas. In Control, they use different degrees of darkening down the surroundings while using a strong directional light and creating a sense of unease, not always by dimming the surroundings. Indirect illumination lights up all the space through reflections of light rays in the space. In architecture, indirect illumination offers a smooth, even lighting that minimizes shadows and ensures objects and people in a space are readily visible. This lighting scheme diverges from the binary nature of directional light and instead creating a flat, consistent spread which softens dynamics to aid with the clarity of space. Architects produce this particularly by strategically using forms and positioning openings, by using materials and diffusing light, and a very extreme ambient illuminance that reduce all the shadows is very artistic that we can see in James Turrell works. Indirect illumination lights up all the space. So basically in video games, it makes spaces more real. And designers can provide more details in the environment that can work with the narrative or even the action of the character. So at this stage that Jessie starts to fly, they have light up all the environment, and the form basically is working with this new ability to help the player perform that action. The last category, the ornamental effects of lighting, explores how direct and indirect light interacts with spaces, surfaces, and materials to create mesmerizing effects. Light designers call it exciting the optic nerve, or the jewelry of architecture. In architecture, the effectiveness of this approach depends on attentive manipulation of lighting through form and a comprehensive understanding of the materials and finishes. So for example, in the second picture, we see the vaults that we have some direct light and the light rays reflect back to the ceiling, and the concrete creates this silver glow on the ceiling. In Control, we have a space called the Quarry, which presents a truly unique and surprising experience. This room contrasts sharply with the mundane bureaucratic offices in the game. The architecture of the Quarry suddenly becomes surreal, with a starry and alien constellation rising in the sky. This departure is heightened by the architectural scale, the choice of materials, and lighting features that transform the sensation from natural to spiritual. The Quarry was designed as an extra-dimensional space contained within the oldest house, which is the building in the game, that conveys the crux of the narrative for this area. MacDonald explains that the use of these effects serve a specific purpose. He says that sometimes it was done just as a kind of bit to actually give some relief to the player, or to give a moment that fills out with the rest of the game. Because 30 hours of just brutalism would be so much to handle. It's good to take these moments just to take some pressure off of that. Audio is another powerful element that helps to create the atmospheric and experience in video games. It can even have more impact on immersion, as vision is directional, whereas sound is omnidirectional. Many books talk about the relations between sound, music, and space, and how they create perception of spaces, which can be extended to video games too. In contrast to we have the idea of listening modes that they refer to different ways that a player engage with an environment and hear those sounds that are embedded in the environment and how they connect to them. Imaginary listening specifically relates to the player's ability to mentally feel in or extend what they hear, using their own experiences. The imaginative immersion mode of listening in game spaces contributes to contextualizing the player's character within the game. And game designers try to convey meanings through that and affect players' actions. In Rainbow, we mostly have ambient sounds, but in some scenes, with specific views, a music that is non-diegetic, meaning that it is not embedded in the world, starts playing. From the designer's perspective, he mentioned that he wanted to evoke some sort of innate sensation. He said, "Sometimes I would have a piece of music in mind that I really like, that I wanted to have a moment with, and I would be able to design a level or a lead up to where this music would play to heighten the experience or lower the expectation for the player to then give them some sort of release." So for me, it was a lot of using the tools that are used for music, which is building expectation, use of repetition and variation, and kind of spacing things out in a way that gives players moments of space to diminish or contemplate. Rainworld is the rebirth of a new world, sprouting amongst the debris of an older fallen one, and deals with an alien world of unknown creatures. It is based on the idea of rummaging through the remains of a fallen society and experiencing its crumbled structures. Its visuals and audio show the aesthetics of decay. Audio design within a virtual environment should consistently fit or correspond to the context, like opening a door, footsteps, ambient soundscapes, and reverberation. Sound design and music that consistently correspond to the context enhances the acceptance of fantastical audio elements that are later added to the audio and the modes of listening that designers define in their design to create experience and putting the player really in that imaginary space to connect with. Thank you.
Press the sign on board.